Welcome to Sustainable Success. Hope everybody is having a great week. And if you are new to Sustainable Success, you found us here on the new platform that we've been housed at now since January on Libsyn. Again, still with the Voice America Business Channel. And again, we welcome you. And again, we encourage you also to follow us on our Apple, Spotify, and also our YouTube channel as well. So feel free to follow us, Sustainable Success there. And also our Facebook group that's been around for almost 8 years since the inception of the show at Sustainable Success 2017. There you'll find many of the guests, subject matter experts that we've had each and every week over the years share their words of wisdom and insights to help elevate you and your business to the next level. And again, if you'd like to hear any future content that has not been covered here on the Sustainable Success Show, feel free to reach out to our team here at Chris@sustainablesuccess.net. That's Chris@sustainablesuccess.net. Today's show is being brought to you today by Alumni Direct. Alumni Direct is a new social media community platform dedicated to bringing alumni together from all different generational types and an opportunity to meet new people for the first time. Now, it is a membership program, taking out all the noise out of social media. You get to come in and generate genuine and authentic relationships with the people you choose to interact with. In addition, it offers a wide array of membership services that are not available to the general public that could help you both on a personal and professional development level. If you'd like some more information about Alumni Direct, check them out at alumnidirect.com. That's alumnidirect.com. Well, we have a wonderful show planned for you today. We're going to be talking about the lean agile dilemma, product management inside a chunky corporate. Yeah, can the lean agile principles apply in the corporate setting? Well, you're going to find out today, and we got the right person that is here. We have our subject matter expert, Katie Tablin, and I'll give you a little information about Katie before she comes on to the show. She began her career as an entry-level analyst and rose through the ranks to become a chief product officer. She currently serves as a non-executive director for data and tech businesses and advises private equity firms. She has over 20 years of experience where she has helped readers recognize the unique challenges of working with chubby corporates and provide strategies to navigate and succeed in those environments. And there's a ton of contact information in the show notes here on the Libsyn platform, and Katie will be sharing her contact information and how you can get in contact with her here later in the show. And without further ado, we welcome Katie Tamblin to the show. Katie, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
It is such a pleasure to have you, and I know you're on the on our show here from the wonderful country of the UK, United Kingdom, and the London area. Even though you are born and raised here in the US, we are so excited to hear about this topic today. I always like to ask our guests that before they talk about the subject they're going to be discussing today, what kind of led you down this path of, in the area of product management and lean agile principles as it applies now in the corporate setting?
Well, it started way back. I originally, in the early part of my career, I was an economist. And so I lived in spreadsheets. And yes, I am that old. We did all of our forecasting and all of our publication of our forecasts through Excel spreadsheets. And eventually, we decided we were going to need a web platform in order to deliver that information. So I experienced my first web development project and my first exposure to what was back then still pretty waterfall. And then before we knew it, we had to rebuild that web platform. And I was interested in, so the more I got exposed to how what we did as economists could be delivered via web platforms, and the more interest I developed in software development and learned more about lean and agile development principles. And then I'd worked on a number of these projects, and they just got more and more painful. It was like even more painful than house building. I just couldn't see how teams could get it so wrong with regards to budget and time that it was going to take to do these things. And so what led me down this path was trying to understand and reconcile where so many of these projects went wrong, and then start to learn from those projects and start to think about things in a different way.
Wow, that's great. Thank you for giving the backstory on that. And so when we look at, the topic that you're going to discuss today with, lean agile methodologies, A lot of times people, when they hear about lean agile method, we think of startups, smaller organizations. Now, when you get into companies and, you got layers of management and other things, the red tape, so to speak, as they say, discuss like, where those applications can apply in helping companies, larger companies to, either become more creative, innovative, grow, expand, what you feel like you'd like to share.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, and you're so right. I think we idolize lean startups, and for good reason. When they go well and they take off, it's super exciting, and it comes with huge financial returns. And I think so often we forget the millions and millions that didn't make it out of that
Oh
round.
yeah, well, there's a lot more than that. I can attest, being on the investor side of that equation. I've had some winners and I've had losers.
And it's really interesting. And it wasn't until, interestingly, my better half sold his company, his startup, and went very quickly from running a lean startup into a chunky corporate, into a big organization. And watching him and kind of going through that with him, a lot of what we had things that have been kind of swirling in my own mind just started to make a lot of sense, because I could see the juxtaposition of the lean startup mentality and the chunky corporate mentality right next to each other. And I had gone through similar in my own career through acquisitions, but always on the chunky corporate side, not on the lean startup side. And what I started to realize is that there is a maturity curve, a business maturity curve, and most companies start off as lean startups. They should, that's right, that is the right fit. And so they start these development principles in a very lean way, but then they scale. They start to get some financial success, they start to make some money, they attract investment, they hire more staff, and the way that those resources flow into the organization changes the values of the organization. And as they may start with VC funding, which is pretty risk tolerant, but as they grow and as they mature over decades, in a lot of cases, the investors will transition to more private equity or public funding, and so those are less risk tolerant investors. And as that shifts, the focus shifts from innovation, that lean startup, constant innovation in
Yeah.
product development, to predictable performance. Those investors want every month, they want to know exactly how many units you shipped and what your financial performance looked like. And that's really different.
Yeah, absolutely. So true. And when you're looking at, like, companies, is it like, now let's say companies that are established, like it could be, it doesn't have to be a Fortune 500, but let's say, what would be that process of bringing some of those principles in, like if it were like a startup, in those situations, or
Yeah.
maybe if there's stakeholders involved, or if it's a private company, that, either one, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key thing is, we always want to innovate. It's it's making sure that when we use those terms, the lean, innovation,
Yes.
agile, that we mean the same thing. And I think, the two of the things that really change an organization. So one I already mentioned, which is this reliability factor, that the investors want predictable performance. Well,
Yes.
new products seeking new markets, which is what lean is all about, that is not going to give you predictable performance. It is margin diluting in the short term, because
Yes.
you've got to try and fail a lot, and you got to build software, and some of you're going to find a market for it, and some of it you're not. And most investor-backed organizations, they want to go into markets by acquiring an established business, because that is much more predictable than trying and failing in different markets. So where we focus our innovation is different. We're not going to focus like, those investors don't really want you. They may say they do, but I don't think they really want you to focus on finding new markets and new products, because of the failure and the dilution of your margin that comes with the failure that is inherent in that creative process. What I think is that, investors really want you to innovate around how you do what you do, not necessarily altering. But product people, when they hear, and tech people, when they hear lean agile, they immediately jump to the new products. And of course, product people want to build new products. That's the fun stuff. So, I think you have a lot of product teams that are always trying to come up with a business case for the new big thing. And, I spent a fair bit of my career writing business cases and then getting them shot down. And it took me so long to figure out why they were all getting shot down. And it's around where you want to spend those innovation,
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest differences.
Yeah. So yeah, talk about that because like you said, even with established companies, you got to develop new products. You have to enhance products or services or new technology, whatever that be. And a lot of times, sometimes, like I said, you got lots of certain people you got to go through to either say, yep, we're moving forward, or that's a priority, or that's not a priority, and what would be some things you could share with the more of the corporate listeners here that might be in that kind of like in that situation or living in that reality?
Well, and I think, it's no surprise that as an organization scales and you add resources and you add staff, there are more personal relationships you have to manage, right?
Yeah.
So if you're a lean startup and you have 10 people that work at your startup, all of those 10 people know what you're trying to accomplish, exactly where your tech development is, exactly what it can and can't do, how you're trying to sell it, because they're all wearing a lot of different hats and playing a lot of
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
roles.
They got more than one just title. Like that title might be their title, but they're wearing multiple hats.
And they all probably know each other, and they're probably, whether it's virtual or physical in person these days, who knows,
Yeah.
but they're all together all day every day, right? Because they're just not that many other people to spend, your working time with. But as your organization scales, naturally people start to get siloed into expertise, areas of expertise. And that is the way that larger businesses seek efficiency. You put experts in expert roles, you put discipline and process around what they do to make sure that you're not wasting time and energy. And in doing that, what you're doing though is creating a shift in where you need to focus. So you've got to communicate across a much larger number of people who don't all have the whole context. And that's why it becomes so important that when we say and use terms like lean and agile, that we all mean the same thing. Because what I've observed at a lot of organizations is your board and your leadership team are batting around lean and agile and innovation, but the way it's being interpreted and delivered on the front lines in these tech projects is totally different from what they actually mean. And
Mm.
that's it's the game of telephone you're playing between the senior leaders and the the thousands of people and millions of decisions that are made in the day to day of building that software and actually coding it.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's great what you're sharing here and so true. And I guess, like, if somebody is in let's say project management and what is there, everyone's striving for better processes, better systems, things that are going to make them more efficient in this process. And again, they're dealing with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of things beyond their control, just like with pretty much anything in the world. But what would be some things you could suggest, again, using the lead agile principles, or the dilemma as you use in the title, what you could share in helping those roles navigate that better?
It's a great question, and I think there's a couple key differences that
Yep.
make lean agile where we need to adapt lean agile to work in these environments. And there's really three things I think that are fundamentally different. One is that I've mentioned twice but not explicitly stated, which is, even in the lean startup, it's stated explicitly that if you are just focused on executing, these lean principles are not for you. I think what chunky corporates need to recognize is they are more focused on execution than they are on innovation. And that comes back to that board.
And can you distinguish there? Because I think that's a great point what you said. If you could really clarify between that innovation and execution.
Yeah, so if you are selling products that exist, and to your point, you always want to add new features. You always want to improve you want to maximize your yield, and you're going to add things here and there. But you fundamentally have a mature product stack of stuff that you have. then your focus is going to be naturally in your tech and product teams on executing the sales of that product stack. So it's not to say that you don't innovate. But it's about where you are over indexed. Whereas a startup is going to be constantly innovating to try to figure out what the products are that are going to sell. And that's something that is explicitly stated. If you're building products that already exist, then you don't need lean principles because you should be doing that focus on just executing, and you have existing software that has to be maintained. And so your tech resources are going towards way more towards maintaining a huge ecosystem of web platforms and applications rather than building them new. So that to me is the first fundamental point.
Yeah. No, that's great. Great point. Now, and I know we got about, like about 3 minutes till our first break, but anything else that, before we get into some other areas, because I, we'll have more time in the second segment. Anything else that from what you just shared, you wanted to elaborate in that area, to kind of really, connect the dots for those in those roles, product managers or anybody that's involved directly, indirectly in that.
Yeah, so I think if we're talking about, and I said there are three things, so I should say what the third one is. So there's the execution, not innovation. There's the volume of relationships. The third one is data, how you manage data. So we'll talk about
Ah,
that in the next segment. But I think, as we're talking about um, how you maintain platforms, I think the things that is so often overlooked is I've worked on a number of projects where we have a leadership team that says, okay, I want you to re-platform. And a lot of people I imagine listening will be familiar with the term replatforming. It is not one that dictionaries recognize. But what it basically means is you've got a software platform that delivers your products and it's old and it doesn't really, it's not fit for purpose anymore. And a lot of the companies at chunky corporates I've worked at, it's maybe 15, 20 years old, the software. So you got to replace that software. And when you rebuild software, it's a completely different game. So rebuilding a software, but to do the same thing it was before, it did before, is called replatforming. You're not building something fundamentally new. You're trying to build a better, faster, more modern version of what you already have.
already have, yeah. Like
That is a
I guess it's like like enhancing, right? You're just enhancing what you've already done.
And
Uh,
that can cost millions, and yet your customers will only get a faster, better, more modern version of what they already have. So it's
yeah,
really difficult from an investor standpoint to invest millions for what is not an additional return. It's simply securing the execution of predictable financial performance that you already have.
already have. Yeah, exactly. Wow. Yeah, that's so true, and it's so important. I know you're going to get into the data here shortly. Anything that you would like to sum up in the next 20 seconds before we go to break about what you shared here in the first segment of the show to kind of illustrate for any of those that have that are joined us a little later.
Yeah, I think the key thing in the first segment is we talked about how a company changes and transitions from a lean startup as they attract investment resources, staff, people, they scale up and then they end up in this performance plateau of chunky corporate where they're not kind of achieving that rocket ship growth anymore. And a lot of times that's down to the misapplication of lean agile. So in the second segment, we can really dig into the detail of how to get out of that performance plateau and back to growth.
Okay, great. Well, this has been wonderful. And again, if you're joining us, we're talking about the lean agile dilemma, product management inside a chunky corporate. Again, implying lean agile principles in the chunky corporate setting. Again, we encourage everyone to go back and listen to this first segment, including the entire show. Valuable insights here from Katie Tablin. And we got to go to break, everybody. When we come right back, we got more to come on the lean agile dilemma, product management inside a chunky corporate. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sustainable Success. If you're just joining us, we are talking about the lead agile dilemma, project management inside a chunky corporate. Again, we're talking about earlier in the segment one, some of the challenges that chunky corporates face in terms of when it comes to either enhancing new products, developing new products, and again, where the lead agile dilemma takes place. So we highly encourage everyone to listen to that in its entirety here on the Libsyn platform with the Voice America Business Channel. So, Katie, just wonderful insights that you had in the first segment. Since you discussed some of the challenges in the first segment, let's talk a little bit about some of the things with the solutions that these corporates can now look to in what you're going to share that would get them into replatforming, as you mentioned earlier, and growing their business, whether if it's in enhancing current products to make them more efficient, more provide better services, whatever that may be.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, we've talked about how companies change from lean startups into chunky corporates. And I think what we want to do now is focus on how chunky corporates should modify lean agile in order to help them continue to accelerate their business performance. What I see quite often is that organizations, when they reach that performance plateau, all of a sudden the growth and the scale isn't coming at the rate that it was when they were lean and starting up.
Yeah.
Have this aging tech stack, all this software that was built 15, 20 years ago that needs maintenance, and it's getting harder and harder to maintain. So a lot of these organizations then spend time and invest in re-platforming, which we just started to talk about at the end of the previous segment, which basically means rebuilding your technology to do the same thing, but better, faster. And so
Yes.
your customers get a better experience. This is where Lean Agile starts to really need adaptation in order to work for replatforming, because Lean Agile, the combining of Lean principles and Agile development methodology, they were really written with new product build in mind. And when you are building software for the first time, and particularly if you're applying Lean principles, you're looking for markets. You're not selling an existing product in existing markets. That's a very different ball game, because you don't need a bunch of process. You've got a small team. The 10 of you working together can manage each other. You don't know what software features you want to build. You're trying to figure out what software features will sell. And you don't have existing data usually. You're building software, and your software will create data once it starts being used. But it's not often that a software company comes in with a whole bunch of existing data. So those three things make rebuilding existing software a very different ballgame. And so what do we need to do? How should we act differently? Well, when you are rebuilding existing technology, the first thing you got to do is get your data in order. So a lot of organizations scale up through acquisition. And it has been the bane of my existence on so many projects to have like 27 different data sets, but all with kind of the same data, but never quite shaped the same way. So I'll give you a really infuriating example is, in the US, we have our dates that go month, day, year. And in the UK, we like to flip it round so that the day comes first and then the month. And nothing is more soul destroying than trying to align two data sets like that. And figuring out, it's all those little tiny details where you mash two data sets together and then you realize, hang on a minute, half the dates in this one don't make sense. And then you realize, oh my God, I had UK dates coming from here and I had US, and now they're all mashed together and I don't know which ones are what, So it's all this stuff, all these problems that data throw up. And that's not really addressed in Lean Agile principles, because that's not really an issue if you're building software for the first time. So one of the first things we need to do as we adapt Lean Agile for chunky corporate world is get your data house in order first. Before you start to rebuild your software, pull in the data from all the different feeds, all the legacy systems, all the acquisitions, all the random databases you built, and get it clean and in shape, and so that you understand what kind of data your software is going to be dealing with as you rebuild it. So that for me is a fundamental one.
Yeah, no, that's fabulous. I love that. Love that there. And, as we look at some of these other solutions, what you talked about, replatforming and, and enhancing, what would be some other things that you would recommend to, as companies transition to chunky corporates, or if they're already there, incorporating other types of, the lean agile principles?
Well, I like to use the analogy of a house, and if you to try to compare and contrast replatforming versus lean agile, in
Yeah,
its
yeah. I by the way, I use the foundation to a house for a lot of the things I speak. I love that. So go
nice.
ahead.
Oh, good. Yeah. Oh, it works well for a lot of things. Um, but if you think about, so if you were to build a house in the truly lean agile purist way, you would build a living room, and then
Yeah,
you would ask the family to move in and tell you what else they want. And you might put in a fake door that has the word kitchen on it and see how many times somebody tries to open that door. And then you would use that information to decide if you build a kitchen next.
yeah,
That is how lean agile works. It's like build the smallest minimum viable product of software that you can and get people using it, and then use fake doors and very A/B testing and all these things to figure out what people are going to use the most.
yes.
Replatforming, though, is like taking a family that already live in a 5-bedroom house and asking them to move into a living room is not going to work for them. So
So it's
like,
reverse. It's reverse.
yeah, exactly. It's like you can't. So if I live in a tent in the garden and you ask me to move into a living room, I'd be like, yay, let's do it.
Wow,
If
yeah,
I if
I got it. It's not. It's going to be. I'm shielded by elements better.
exactly. So that's like a person who's never had the product before.
Yeah,
That this is an upgrade for them because they've never had anything like it. But giving someone a minimum viable software product, a minimum viable product, when they already have a full platform that they use every day, that doesn't work, because it's like telling someone to go from their 5-bedroom house into a living room. They're gonna no, why would I do that? I don't need a fake door to tell you that I need a kitchen. I just will tell you I want a kitchen, I want 5 bedrooms, I want 4 bathrooms, I want, because I have it already. So the biggest difference between re-platforming, building a newer, more modern version of software that already exists, is that you know the features. And let's not, let's pause for a minute and go, hallelujah, we know the features. So lean startups don't have that, that luxury. They're trying to figure out, they're going to have to fail. They're going to build a lot of features that don't get used. But chunky corporates with existing product stacks have this amazing wealth of usage data. And so they know what features their customers use, and they know what they can monetize. So, but if what happens quite often is then you go into a re-platforming project with a lean agile mindset, and the agile purists and the lean purists are going, no, 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 don't tell me what features to build. We got to get a minimum viable product out there, and we got to get our customers using it. But then customers, they won't use it, because it doesn't do everything. Your minimum viable product is a replica of the platform you already had. And if it
yeah,
took you 10 years to build that platform over the 10-year life of your company, why do you think you can rebuild it in 6 months?
yeah,
That's not logical.
yeah. Wow. So that makes sense. No, thank you for sharing that. And we encourage, listeners that are, listening, take notes, because this is, great information. Go back and listen to this again and again. You'll have a chance to reach out to Katie here later. If you could share other things that you feel organizations, when we look at this particular area, Katie, what should be other things in mind if we're, because every organization is operating on short-term objectives, somewhere in the middle, and again, long-term objectives. And again, the bigger the company, it's public, stakeholders involved. They're obviously going to be looking for those short-term objectives, like, and I know you covered a little bit, but what would be some of the things you can share, insights that could play into what you've shared here to address those areas?
Yeah, I think the first thing is we need our business leaders to use the right language and to understand the implications of asking their teams to be lean agile. I think a lot of business leaders and investors don't realize that when they say to their tech teams and their product teams, we want you to be lean and agile, that comes with very specific connotations that they may not necessarily mean. And so they may send hairs running, with product people that are like, oh, he wants us to be lean, she wants us to be lean. So now we're going to go find all these new features in new markets. And then they end up diluting your margin. So don't ask them to be lean in the software methodology sense unless that's what you mean. And same with agile. Don't ask them to be agile when what you actually want is process documentation and a set list of features to be rebuilt, because agile purists will retaliate against that. And what it creates is this like us versus them culture, where you have
Yeah.
product and tech people who are lean agile purists being like, they don't know what they're talking about. They keep telling us to do this, but then they're also asking us to rebuild the software, and you can't rebuild the software in lean agile, so it creates this friction.
So,
Um,
so when I'm here, if I'm hearing this, and this is oftentimes the issue in a lot of work, especially as the companies get bigger, is this is a communication
yeah,
issue.
100%.
And sometimes we think we're communicating that effectively when in essence, it's all based on assumptions and speculation on any of the parties involved. What would you recommend, like in terms of communication, like some things, especially with now in these organizations as they get bigger, there's more diversity, there's more, multi-generational types, different personality types, ethnic backgrounds, all of those can play a factor in how we perceive what we hear and process and so on.
100, yeah, 100%. And I think you're spot on. Not only do you have so many more relationships in between, interpersonal relationships you have to manage because your company is bigger,
Yeah.
but you also have, to your point, so many more agendas, competing
Yeah.
priorities. So you have to make really, really tough decisions and be really, really clear across the organization. So I think the critical first step. So what I espouse in the book is I refer to it as the orienteering method. And it really is an adaptation of lean agile, whereby you start with alignment. So you start with making sure everyone at the organization understands what you are going to do with your product and tech resources and what you're not going to do, so that you don't create inefficiency through confusion and friction.
Yeah.
So I think getting the management aligned, and making sure management understand what replatforming is, and that they're aligned with their tech leaders and throughout the tech organization, and product with what is going to be the space and what are going to be the resources that we are going to set aside for new product development, and what are going to be the resources in the budget and the headspace that we set aside for modernizing what already exists, and how do
Yeah.
we reconcile the two. So openly having that conversation and making those decisions, and keeping that alignment, to me that's step one.
Yeah, so it's in that. So re-platform, we obviously we have to communicate and discuss it. Would that require any other things? Like, would there be any training involved in that in case people are not, maybe they understand, but they don't understand enough to actually make that adapt to that, what you just said. They may need to be brushed up on things.
100%. So I think change management is vastly underestimated and underserved in these projects. A replatforming project is a huge change for your customers, for your colleagues, and for specifically for your product and tech team as well. So everybody needs to be brought up that curve. And one of the things that's funny you mentioned training is, I see so many relationships between sales and product that are suffering with misalignment, because the sales team are not trained on how much leeway they can give when they talk about their products. Like, are we selling fixed products? Can I promise a new feature that hasn't been built yet? Can I, say to a customer, we'll build some bespoke software for them? If those things aren't aligned, so if your salespeople and your account managers, the people that interact with your customers, if they aren't 100% aligned to your product and tech strategy, they will create problems for your product and tech team.
Yeah, it's like that. Yeah, it's like that game telephone, right?
Yeah,
You say one thing, by the time it gets to the other, it's totally out of the original context.
yeah, 100%. And then you've got a customer who says, well, the salesperson promised me this new feature a year ago, and a product team saying we were never going to build that. Like, there was no way. So you've got to get that alignment horizontally and vertically across the organization. And I already mentioned, step 2 in the orienteering method, which is get the data right, invest in the right data resources. So there, I go into the book, there's a really boring table about different data skills and the different types of people that you need in order to have a data strategy that takes you all the way from where the data exists, how you're going to use it, how you're going to store it, and how you're going to create value from it. The next thing is to assign appropriate resources. So if you're replatforming, agree with your investors, with your, with your leadership team, what resources you're going to need. And then lay out that list of features. So you have this amazing knowledge of what your project, like you already have a project plan, really, or at a minimum, you have a list of features that need to be rebuilt, and you can form that list based off what your customers are using. Hopefully, there'll be features you can sunset because they're not used a lot, and you can make existing features better. But I see a lot of these projects go off the rails because people get sidetracked by the shiny new product, and then they
Mm.
forget to rebuild the existing functionality. You got to rebuild the existing functionality first, or else your customers are never going to switch from the old platform to the new.
Yeah,
Um,
like you said, you just can't just drop what's been working to like it's you gotta make sure that again that's still efficient, that then you can then look at the other area.
it's going to sound like this would never happen when I say that, when I recount this story, but I can tell you it's happened to me. I've seen it, I've observed it multiple times. I've seen companies go out and say, we're going to replatform, we're building a new platform, and it's going to do the stuff that our existing product stack does. But then they start completely with lean agile in mind, and so they go build something new that does kind of the same thing, but they don't have the data from the old platform in it, and they get sidetracked by customers. So they get customers using it, they go back to that MVP thing. So I want customers using my new platform as soon as possible, and they can't be my existing customers because my existing customers won't use the new platform until it does all the stuff that the old platform does. So they get new customers using the new platform. Well, then they get sidetracked because those new customers take the platform in a different direction. They ask for new features that don't exist on the old platform. So the new platform team builds those. And I once looked at an acquisition, and I was like, this is a red flag coming. You know, let's not invest in this because I think this could go sideways. And sure enough, 2 years later, reconnected with that company, and they still had two different platforms, one that did kind of the same thing, but they couldn't get the data from the old platform into the new one, and they couldn't get the customers from the old platform to the new one because it had gone in a different direction. And so now they didn't re-platform, they now have two platforms that they have to maintain, twice the maintenance cost,
Oh, wow.
and no plan for getting off the old one. And the longer those platforms diverge, the harder it's going to get to bring them back together.
Yeah, yeah. No, so it's such valuable insights that you shared there, and again, with going back, what you were saying, the communication is so key in every aspect of that process there, from what
Yeah,
you shared.
absolutely. Yeah.
Wow, wow, so cool. I know we're near the end of our second segment. We're going to be going into our last segment here. But again, anybody that is just joining us, we've been talking about the lean agile dilemma, product management inside a chunky corporate. We're here with Katie Tablin. Again, you'll be able to get her contact information here later in the last segment of the show here, coming up soon, and also in the show notes. We got to go to break, everybody, but we'll be right back. Welcome back to Sustainable Success. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the lean agile dilemma, product management inside chunky corporate. Again, Katie Tablin, our subject matter expert, has shared some valuable insights over the last two segments that we highly encourage everyone to check out. And again, our show is being brought to you today by Alumni Direct. Alumni Direct is a new social media community platform dedicated to bringing alumni together from all different generational types, and again, an opportunity to meet new people for the first time. Now, it also features a special segment of the platform called From Athletes to Entrepreneurs. These are for professional athletes that are transitioning into everyday life. Maybe perhaps they're going into a new career, buying a business, a franchise, whatever it may be. Well, guess what? You don't have to do it alone. Now you can form different groups around people that are doing this at, in another, coming from their sport into wherever they're transitioning into. And now you can share insights and information to help uplift each other during this process. There's also a podcast that supports this called From Athletes to Entrepreneurs. And again, you can check that on the platform at alumnidirect.com. That's alumnidirect.com. Katie, just some valuable information that you've shared so far in the show. I can't thank you enough, especially for those that are, that are in organizations that have grown into that chunky corporate, experienced some of these challenges you talked about in the first segment, and you gave some valuable insights of some of the things they can be doing better and differently. Uh, with anything in a business, technology is always involved. And whether if you don't think you're a technology company at all, maybe your products and services has nothing to do with it. Technology is part of the process, but there's a human element to that as well. And can you talk about again that the coming together of the technology with the human element, with what you shared here today?
Yeah, the one of the we ran a really interesting exercise, and it was the idea of a wonderful sales leader that I've worked with, and we had gone through this development of a CRM, a customer relationship management system, and the sales team had an existing CRM system, and we were transitioning their processes, trying to optimize their processes into a new CRM system. And so the sales team were super involved throughout the whole process. But inevitably the project kind of kept going on and going on and going on. Every time they went in to actually use the CRM system, they'd find something else that was missing, a step missing, or something that was a little bit different. And frustration grew on both sides. The tech team felt like, oh, it's never going to end. We can't. And the sales team said we can't switch until we're 100% sure everything works, because we don't want to impact our sales numbers, because we got to get that predictable financial performance our investors want. And so at the end of it, when we all kind of were friends again, and and hugged and made up, this sales leader, she had a great idea. She said, "You know what I'm going to do at our conference? I am going to take your product, one of the product leaders, and I'm going to give them an easel and a big sheet of paper, poster size paper, and a big marker, and I'm going to ask him to draw a picture, and I'm going to let people throw out." And so they had, the piece of the poster was not facing the audience. The audience were throwing out, telling him, build draw a house. It should have windows. It should have a chimney. It should have a front door. And when he turned around the picture he had drawn, it didn't look anything like the picture they were describing.
Mm.
So they had an image. Sorry, I should have said they had an image on a screen that they were trying to describe to him that he couldn't see, and he's drawing it. And so basically, it was a fantastic exercise in this audience was all looking at the same picture of a house and describing it to a person who couldn't see it. And when he drew it, it didn't look anything like the house they were describing. So, it tells you communication is so much harder than we think it is.
Oh, it's not something we graduate. It's always evolving and learning, no matter how better we get it. But we always improve. Yeah, but feel free to keep sharing on that.
Yeah. And so, I think what we forget, and so her point, and I think it was so brilliant that she did this, she wanted the whole room to appreciate how it's easy to point fingers and say the tech team didn't build what we wanted them to build, and for the tech team to say, well, the salespeople didn't tell us what they want in enough detail. That's easy to do, but the reality is we are all one team, and we are all as effective as we work together and how effectively we communicate. Building software, people forget it's fundamentally a human enterprise, because it's people. that write the code these days, even if AI writes the code for us in the near future, and it does in some places and in some organizations, but not most. Even when that happens, it's still going to be a person asking the AI to write
Well,
it.
it's being prompted. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there is a person, crafting this vision. And in large organizations, there are lots of people crafting these, and getting that alignment and that communication and those relationships and keeping them strong is critical to getting a lot of people pulling in the same direction on one of these projects. I like to think of large enterprise software projects as a lot like puzzles. You get a lot of pieces and a lot of engineers, and so you'll have a team of engineers, a Scrum team of engineers, to use the agile term.
Yeah, I know that Scrum
Um,
Master.
yes, exactly. So you have a Scrum team and a Scrum Master but imagine each one of those in a large organization. Imagine each one of those Scrum teams is building a piece of a puzzle.
Yeah.
At some point in a large enterprise software project, all those pieces have to fit together.
Mm,
But you don't make a puzzle. You don't manufacture a puzzle by cutting out, by building each piece and then hoping it fits, right? You do the whole thing and then you cut it. It's
exactly.
actually much harder. Imagine, put yourself in the shoes of someone trying to make a puzzle by carving each piece. That's what you're asking. When you ask 10 Scrum teams to each build a piece and then hope it fits together, that's basically what you're asking them to do. And if you don't have the human element accounted for across the teams, so Agile is great for managing communication and working together within a Scrum. Orienteering, my method, is about how you get those Scrums to work together, how you get 10 Scrums working together across their teams, not within them. So that's the adaptation. I'm not trying to rewrite Agile. It works great. I'm trying to adapt it for a situation where you have enterprise software projects, which are just fundamentally much larger.
Much larger, yeah, exactly, and it's a process for sure. And when you have those, because you mentioned the importance of communication, you talked about like in the scrub setting, people all like they have to understand what each is doing in that, like in this case, creating their puzzle piece, so to speak, to put it all together to make sure it works. You mentioned communication, but like in terms of communicating and getting people, I always like to use the term huddles, like having are huddles important in this process? And some people may that don't know what that means. It's not like a 30-minute meeting. It's like, and it's not like going into a huddle in football 30 seconds and calling a play, but it's a short meeting, so to speak, where you're very specific on with an agenda of what you have to address to move things forward.
Yes, 100%. And I think those huddles should run across the scrum. A scrum master from each team
Yeah.
or a leader from each team should get together in a huddle. And quite often I find that's what's missing is they're focusing those meeting times within their team. And then when it comes time to fit what the different teams are doing together, if you had a huddle, a cross team huddle, as effectively as you had the inner team communication, I think teams would be much more likely to build stuff that fits together well.
Yeah.
100%. That's a great idea. And I like that term. We'll use that term.
Yeah, yeah, please do. Yeah,
Huddle.
I've used it in my leadership communication consulting business for years, and I mean, usually the people that understood what that had that like sports usually pick up on it quickly, but once you break it down, people understand it, and it's not your typical type of meeting where things can go off on a tangent. Is there anything else you'd like to share from what you were talking about, even not only in this segment, can even tie into everything you talked about that you feel is important to really connect the dots with everything you shared here today on the show?
Yeah, so I think if we go back, when we look at the kind of the arc of the lean agile dilemma, it's from my perspective, it starts with this maturity curve. You're a lean startup at some point in your journey as a company, and you only have a few folks sat around, each one doing 10 different jobs and each one knowing exactly everything there is to know about the business. And then you attract those resources. And with the resources and the investment, your teams get bigger. Um, you may spend as an organization 10, 20, 30 years in that scaling up phase. And you can imagine your kind of typical curve where you're shooting up. Your revenue is shooting up, your profitability is shooting up, your resources are shooting up, your access to capital is shooting up as you attract investment. And that could go on for, decades. But eventually a lot of companies hit a plateau. And I think, I think of chunky corporate as when you're in that plateau, you've scaled up beyond your optimal capacity.
Yeah.
You've kind of gone beyond. And I think of optimal capacity. I think in technology teams and in product teams, we reach the optimal capacity at a much smaller level than we think we will. And if you look and agile reflects that, because as those teams get bigger, the harder it is to coordinate across them, like we were just talking about. So I think it's very important that as a company, when they hit that plateau, it's often that they've got aging software. So their customer experience is not that great. Maybe their colleague experience is not that great. They've got a CRM system, but it takes 30 seconds to load a page, and it's clunky, and it doesn't have all the bells and whistles and all of that. So things are starting to creak from a technology perspective. And that has knock-on effects. It starts to impact your sales performance. It starts to impact your efficiency, and internal systems start to creak. And now, one of the things that is really important to be aware of as well is most organizations are seeking a subscription model these days because of the predictability of revenue generation on a subscription model. But an annual subscription model takes a long time to figure out that your products are no longer commercially attractive, because you've got this huge lag. So by the time you start to lose customers, you are years behind the curve. You cannot start a software replatforming exercise at the point you start to lose customers.
Well, that's again, you don't want to be you want to be proactive. And just because things are going maybe good to that point doesn't mean, oh, okay, become complacent. Always anticipating that change is going to happen with or without you, that you have to be on top of it.
Yeah, so I think, again, being proactive about recognizing before you get into a chunky corporate plateau or even a slide back, being proactive about maintaining your product and your tech stack. And business leaders, especially, private equity works on cycles. And so if you're in an investment cycle, you want to make that upfront, that investment in that tech stack upfront in the cycle. So that you can get the benefit of it. So it's aligning your leadership and your tech and your product team around those core principles, and making sure that you are addressing that kind of stagnation that could be looming if you have gone beyond. And a lot of times, think about scaling back to go faster. I've seen tech projects scale back from 100 developers down to 60 and get just as much done, because the extra 40 developers that were beyond optimal capacity were just spinning their wheels doing stuff that wasn't part of the core feature set.
Wow. No, just some great information. I mean, you have just delivered so much value. We're getting towards the end of the show, and I want to make sure that we take time to let people know how to get in touch with you. But again, I want to thank you personally for, taking time out of your busy day to be with us here on the show, sharing your words of insights, and also from the team here at Sustainable Success at Voice America. What would be the best way the audience could get in touch with you? What are you up to? Anything that you'd like to provide or share with them?
Oh, thanks so much. So the easiest way to get in touch with me is my website, katietamblin.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn. I would love to connect with folks that have listened to the show or folks that have questions. You can do that either through my website directly, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn to continue the discussion. The book is available through Springer Link, Springer Nature. It's published by A-Press, and of course it's available online and major booksellers, so Amazon or wherever you like to buy your books.
Well, we'll make sure, again, all of that information will be in the show notes on the Libsyn platform under this show. So again, all of Katie's contact information, what she gave you, that will be here in the show. Before we conclude the show, Katie, in 20 seconds, anything else that you'd like to sum up or leave the audience on a note to take action?
Well, I feel I should say, because sometimes some people have read the title of my book and they think chunky corporate is an insult. And so I feel I should clear the air and say it is absolutely not an insult. A chunky corporate is a great thing to be. You know, as we think about how human and enterprise building software is, we also think about the people that work at our organizations. Chunky corporates are stable and they're predictable. And
Yeah.
that is what people want. That is a safe haven in an unpredictable, chaotic world. So I think we need to take a moment to appreciate and be gracious and have gratitude for chunky corporates because they are incredibly solid foundations in the corporate world.
Well, thank you for that clarification. Again, as we were talking about communication, there is no room now for assumption and speculation after what you shared there. Katie, thank you so much again for your taking your time. We greatly appreciate you. And again, we encourage everybody to get your hands on her book on Amazon. And again, we'll make sure to have all that information in the show notes. Thank you so much, Katie.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute delight speaking with you.
Our pleasure. And listeners, we want to thank you each and every week joining us here at Sustainable Success. Again, we are committed to bringing subject matter experts like Katie in to help elevate you and your business to the next level because they always share from personal experience and helping you to decide what is best for you to move forward. Till then, everybody, have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next Thursday at the same time.